What's going on, guys? Alex from True Duelist here, and today I'm going to be going over the what's going on, guys? Alex from True Duelist here. Today I'm going to be covering one of the more hype decks recently, and that is the Hoenna Sola tokens deck, or as I like to call it, Hoenna Zoo. So we'll get right into it. So the purpose of this deck is essentially an aggro deck, but it doesn't want to just go face like a lot of the red decks do. It also wants to take efficient trades when they're available. So I'm going to walk through a bit of the deck. I'm going to cover the list. I'm going to go over why I play specific cards. I'm going to talk about how you're supposed to play against specific decks. And I'll also go over the mole strategies in this video. So buckle up, guys, because this is going to be a pretty long one. So let's get right into it here. Alright, so for starters, we have 3 to lead poison. So for those of you who don't know, how augments work is when they're equipped to a creature, the person who controls that unit now controls the augment. So this card kind of got changed how it works. So what this card does is it says, equip to target unit at the start of your next turn, destroy the equipped unit. Now, because this card equips to an opponent's unit, what happens is they read the card from their perspective, so they control it, and as soon as their turn starts, it's the start of your next turn, you're being the person who controls this, and this kills their guy. So this essentially makes this card a 1-cost removal. This card is incredibly powerful now because it is in fact a 1-cost removal. One of its biggest applications is killing Yuki after you've broken your opponent's towers, and I think that's where you'll see it come up the most. It's also just a great tempo card because this deck is sort of a tempo aggro deck. You do get to weave this in your curve a lot, where you might go, it might be turn 2, turn 3, you go play a guy, kill one of their guys, which is especially huge in the mirror when you're trying to make sure they can't race you, or you're just trying to keep their board clear. So this card's really strong. I expect to see this in 3 of this in every single black deck that exists, just because of how powerful it actually is. So next we have Standard Shard Sword. So Standard Shard Sword says it costs 1, you equip it to a unit, and it gets plus 500 and target attack. Where this comes up the most is when you get this card in your opening hand. If your opponent goes first, they play any guy. Let's say the ideal one is the Shard Beast, and they're not playing Kite, and it's very important that they're not playing Kite for this. Unless they are an Ergon deck. If they're an Ergon deck, you don't care. So typically what happens is you're going to, they're going to play a guy, you're going to just break Sola turn 1, and you're going to put the sword on Sola, and you're just going to start kind of going in at their guys, and kind of making it so they can't really ever build up a board. And while you're doing this, you're accumulating counters on Hoenna. So you're able to just keep their board clear. You can also amass a board while you're doing this. So turn 1, you make the Sola, you put the sword on it, you trade into one of their guys. Turn 2, maybe you play a 2-drop, or you play 2 1-drops, or 1-1-drop, whatever you do. And then at this point, your opponent's probably not going to keep playing guys, right? So what you do in this time is you take that they're not playing any guys, and you just start making your board go as wide as possible. You might not want to break towers right away. So say you do play like a 1-drop or a 2-drop on 2, you might not swing with it on 3 because you don't want to hit that wind tower and lose the Sola. So you might sit there for a few turns and kind of sit on that Sola while you make a huge board, and your opponent just has to keep passing every turn because they're unable to play guys or they don't have removal. So this is one of the flex spots. It has come up a few times. The downsides with this is, so if you're playing like the Liam Kite deck, they can just break their Kite right away, and they're willing to accept that trade. That's a pretty good trade for them. They got a card out of your hand, and they got their Sola for their Kite. They don't need Kite to win the game. Like, Kite is important to them, but they don't need it. Ergon, on the other hand, kind of wants Kite a little bit more. It wants to keep looping Sylvia against you. They also might accept losing Kite on the spot, but you're a little bit more okay with that than you are against the the Liam decks. So that's something to keep in mind when you make this play. Like I said, this is a flex spot. I could easily see this just being 2 more Quorum Squires. I'm playing around with it for now. Like I said, it's been okay so far. Moving on, we have 1 Quorum Squire. Recently, this was just a 3rd Omega Magic Hikari. I talked over with my teammates a little bit. John seems to think that you only need 2 Hikari, and Hikari isn't very useful to the late game, which is true. So I'm trying 1 Quorum Squire. It could go back up to 3 Hikari. I think Hikari's a really solid card, but we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it. Overall, though, Quorum Squire, he's just a 1-drop 1000. You're trying to play as many of those as possible. He does search for the sword when he dies, so that's nice. Really, though, his main purpose is he's just a 1-drop 1000. He can break the smaller towers, and hitting a 1-drop in this deck is very important. Moving on, Failed Golem number 1, another 1-drop 1000. This one's a little bit better because it's a golem, so it triggers your jealousy and it triggers your avarice. It also buries a golem when it dies. There's some interactions that'll come up with this as we move through the deck profile, some with Hidden Laboratory, Yami, and the Philosopher's Stone. So honestly, there are a couple cool plays you can perform with this. We'll talk about them a little more as I go through the deck. Next, it's down here because of the way I installed the Lackey files, but for our last 1-drop, 3 Shard Beast, I mean, I don't know what to say about this guy except he's nuts. He's the juice. He should almost be in every single deck. Like every aggro deck plays him for sure, and even some control decks just because they need to be able to contest the aggro decks Raging Shard Beasts. This guy is nuts, totally crazy. So he just says you can't play guys with a cost of 3 or more, but you don't care for the most part because, as you can see, we don't have too many 3 cost or higher guys in the deck. You can also still cheat in Yukis with its effect. This only says play, so that just means casting from your hand. If you're playing things by effects or cheating them in play, it doesn't count, so you can still Yami 3 drops into play, and you can still put Yukis in play. So this guy is just nuts. He's a 3 of, the best 1-drop you can ask for. I don't know what much more to say about him. He's a 2000. He overstats everything besides himself, of course. So moving on. 1 Philosopher's Stone. There's really no reason not to play this card. It almost always gets its mana value. So even if the worst this card is, like say the worst is just you played and removed 2 guys, that's still you get to cast any 2-drop or less in your deck at instant speed. That is still better than casting any single 2-drop in your deck not at instant speed. But usually it has more than 2 counters on it. On average, this card has 3 to 4 counters, depending on how many Failed Golem number 1s you have lost so far. It's not a card that you're ever going to play on 2 for the most part, unless like your Failed Golem cracked into a red tower, died, and you buried something, and you really just need a 2-drop. For the most part, it's going to come up in the late game when you need to keep quick casting dudes, or rather flashing guys in. That's a big part of this deck too, is how you win the game towards the end is you start summoning guys at instant speed, so you can kind of dodge the Sylvias and dodge the mass removals, as there aren't really any instant speed board wipes at the moment. So moving on. So we'll get to what I'll just say is the best card in the deck. This card's broken. This card is absolutely beyond snapped. So this card is a 2-cost augment. It's called Hidden Laboratory. When it comes in play, if your champion is Hoenna, the Immoral Conjurer, you put 3 counters on her. Obviously, we are Hoenna. I forgot to go over that in the beginning. This is Hoenna Sola. I assume most people watching know what Hoenna and Sola do, but if you don't, I'll go over it a little bit later in the video. So it says you can tap it and sacrifice a golem to draw one card. So you can exhaust things the turn they come in play. So that does come up sometimes. Sometimes you just play this and you just draw a card with it instantly. So I'll talk a little bit about this card in depth. So for starters, this card always gets a 15 body that you can flash in. So imagine this is a 2-drop that just says 1500 quick cast or 1500 flash. That's just at the very minimum. Now, that 1500 also replaces itself in the form of a draw. So what this card essentially does is besides giving you a body, it also makes trading against your deck really, really hard to do. One thing your opponent is going to want to do is try to up trade on you. So when your guys are tapped, even though Sola does untap some of them are going to be still tapped, and your opponent is going to try to take trades. Instead of your opponent actually getting the trade, you're just going to get to draw a card. This card lets you set up tons of Yami plays. I mentioned earlier with the Failed Golem number 1. A lot of times what happens is you end up sacking the Failed Golem number 1 to Hidden Laboratory, burying one of the 3 drops, either the Golem of Avarice or the Golem of Allurement, and then summoning them with Yami. Sometimes you end up just burying this, you just sacrifice this, bury it, and play the Philosopher's Stone. It allows you to dodge removal. Basically, this is the card that keeps your deck going. You're able to just keep sacrificing off your golems whenever you want. Sometimes you just sacrifice them because you need to draw cards. Like, it's not even like your opponent's trying to remove them or attack into them. You want to draw cards. And because your deck creates so many golems in the form of tokens and all these other golems you play, even Golem of Devourment, which keeps searching copies of itself, this card just keeps your deck going. And the more of this card you see in a game, the higher your win percentage. You can never have too many of this card. This is definitely an auto keep in the opening hand and one of the key cards in the deck, and I think you'll see a difference in your win ratio in games where you see this and games where you don't see this. Overall, I think this card is nuts. Another nice thing is a lot of decks with Kite have the Zephyr Crystal, but you don't even need to worry too much about that, because even if they Zephyr Crystal this, you spent 2, they spent 3, so you're already getting tempo in terms of mana. This card already replaced itself in the form of a 1500 instant speed guy, and on top of that, if you want to, you can draw a card so it truly replaces itself too. So you don't even have to really worry about this card getting removed by augment removal too much. Not that you want it to, but it's not a big deal when it does. 2 Dust Strike. This is just a good removal spell / tempo card. It costs 2. You have a ton of Dark Eyes in the deck. You can generate Dark Eyes with Hoenna, so it's always usually live. It's just a really good tempo card. It removes big threats. If you're not playing against Urgon, it can kill Sylvia. It's just, overall, it's just a good removal spell. It's quick cast. It stops attackers. It can, like, if your opponent has a boss creature and you're trading into it, it lets you win the fight against, like, a 4,000 guy with, say, a big target attacker or Yuki or something like that. Overall, it's a good card. This is one of my flex spots, though. I think it's one of the few cards that's not really essential to the deck, and it can definitely be cut for something else if you needed it to. I have been back and forth on Brainwipe Beam. This one costs 2 and is instant, but Brainwipe Beam does not have the requirement of having a Dark Eye, and it serves a few different applications, but we'll talk about that more when we get to the sideboard. 2 Omega Magic Hikari. This card is solid overall. So what this card does is it's an instacast card. It says you can put a Knight unit token with 1,000 power and Guardian in play. And if you have 2 or less towers remaining, you put in play 2 tokens instead. So this is a card you never really want to see in your opening hand. It's a card you want to draw into later in the game. This is kind of a closer card. So usually when you're, like, maybe not necessarily out of gas, but your board is kind of like in shambles, your opponent is kind of like starting to stabilize, and they're starting to hit towers, and they're starting to kind of get towards winning the game themselves. This is where this card comes in big, because you're able to just make guys at instant speed, which can't be cleared by Sylvia. You make 2 of them too, so single target removals, which is what most of the instant speed removal is, can't actually pick all of them off effectively. And even when you're not making 2, when you're still just swinging for game, it's still just another instacast body, which is huge. So when you combine it with Hoenna and maybe even breaking your Sola, you're able to just roll out a bunch of guys at once. Overall, I think this card is solid. It might go back up to 3, like I said. I'm still playing around with it. Another big thing about this card is the shard you have. You have a shard in here. The light one says you can tap it and one other card to give a Guardian plus 500. This is super relevant with this card because usually when you play this, it's the late game and you are going to have a ton of mana open. So what you end up doing is you'll end up playing this a lot of times, summoning the 2 guys, and then before your untap on your turn, you'll use your extra mana to usually pump this guy to a 15 so he can break all the towers, or if for some reason you need him to, he can make more efficient trades. Like I said, this is a solid finisher, even when you're casting it for 1, as long as you know the body is going to win you the game. So we'll go to the next card, Omega Magic Yami, arguably the best card in the deck, maybe the best. I would say it's on par with Hidden Lab. So Omega Magic Yami, for those of you who don't know, is an instacast card that says you can either give a unit minus 1,000, or you can bring back a 3-drop or less from your grave and put it into play. And if you have 2 or less towers remaining, you can do both of these effects. So here's where this card comes into play. So the main focus of this deck is playing little guys early, kind of rushing them down, and then when your opponent starts to get their shit together, you start casting guys at quick cast speed or insta cast speed, because there's not really a way to deal with a bunch of guys being casted at the end of your turn efficiently. So this is just another card that's going to summon you a guy at insta cast speed. A big part of this, though, is the Hidden Laboratory and the Failed Golem #1 interaction. So Failed Golem #1 is usually going to end up bearing you a 3-drop, so you can summon it off of Yami, and a lot of times you'll make huge tempo swings with Golem of Allurement. You'll bury Golem of Allurement, and then you'll steal one of their 1-drops, so you're up an extra 2 guys to them. Sometimes you'll just bring back Golem of Avarice just because you want to rip a card out of their hand and they don't have a 1-drop on the board. You're still creating a 2,000 body and taking a card out of their hand. Usually this card gets casted before you have 2 or less towers remaining, so don't focus too much on trying to get the value of minus 1,000 and returning a guy. It will come up and it's great when it does, but that's not the focus of this card like it is with Hikari. You really just want to use this to kind of start casting guys at insta speed. Like I said, that's usually done to close out the game, but sometimes you just end up doing it earlier because it's favorable, especially with the Golem of Allurement. Nothing feels better than going Hidden Lab, sack my Failed Golem #1, bury an Allurement, bring it back, and steal a Shard Beast. It's actually the greatest feeling in the world. Another nice thing about this card is 3-drops brought back by this do not fall under Raging Shard Beast clause, so you can bring 3-drops back. This is only, once again, for cards that you actually cast from the hand, not cards that are cheated into play by effects like Yami and Yuki. Moving on, so 3 Golem of Devourment. If you've been playing for any amount of time, you should know what this guy does, but if you haven't, he is a 1,000 Guardian that cannot deal damage, and he says when he ruined, when he's destroyed or sacrificed, he puts in play a copy of himself. Why this is so big, it's huge against aggro decks. Aggro decks right now don't really have an efficient way to remove him. He's huge in the mirror. He's huge against the Gears deck. The Gears deck doesn't actually have any Expels cards, so he kind of just stays there and gets 3 blocks. He works great with Hidden Lab. When you need to draw cards, he just puts another copy of himself out. So even if you're not playing against an aggressive deck, if you have him in Hidden Lab, you can just play him against a control deck, and you kind of have like a small draw engine, so to speak. He's really, really good. He doesn't go with the flow of the deck, which is the only downside to him. Like, this is a more aggressive trade type deck, whereas he doesn't really do any of that. But where he does come into play is when you are playing against other aggro decks, you kind of get to play this guy and hide behind him. So while your guys are taking all the efficient trades between him and Sola, your opponent doesn't really have a chance to take efficient trades back on you, especially when you have this guy. So that's a reason he's huge. He also, as a side thing, fuels the Philosopher's Stone. So once you've gone through all three of them, that's just 3 more cards in your grave for Philosopher's Stone. So like I said, pretty solid blocker, probably the best Guardian in the game right now, and a definite auto include. Moving on, we have Golem of Jealousy. So Golem of Jealousy says when it comes in play, if you control another golem, you draw one, it's a 1,000. This guy's on the smaller side. So you might be saying, okay, why are you playing 3 Golem of Jealousy, Alex? I've seen a lot of other lists, and they're really only playing 1, if even playing this guy at all. So the reason you play this guy is he draws a card. That's just it. He's a 1,000. He can break the 1,000 towers. He can swing for game, and one thing you guys will learn really quickly is when you get towards the end of the game, it's not so much about having a bunch of 1,500 guys, it's just about having a bunch of guys that can attack, because you need any amount of damage to swing for lethal, and that's what he ends up doing a lot of times, is just breaking those 1,000 towers or swinging for lethal. You want guys that replace themselves because you need to just keep drawing cards. Your guys don't necessarily have to be huge as long as they replace themselves and can break some of the towers. So I think having a guy that does replace himself like he does is pretty efficient. You don't lose anything when your opponent trades into this. When it breaks the wind tower, you feel great, because if your opponent sends this back to your hand, you get to just replay it and draw another card. So overall, I think this card's pretty solid. I think people are really undervaluing it. It's really good in a swarm type deck because it does in fact replace itself, so you can kind of just keep going. With Hidden Laboratory, this card draws 2 cards, so it's super, super good. Moving on, we have Golem of Avarice. Golem of Avarice is a 2k 3-drop that says when he comes in play, if you control another golem, you discard a card from their hand randomly. So this one's bigger versus the control decks. Versus Urgon, this one's a little more important. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of people don't understand that hand size does matter to Urgon. Like, a lot of people believe that, oh, they don't care about their hand because they can pick stuff up. They do. They need cards just like any other deck. If all they're doing is picking up Sylvia every single turn, and they don't have any cards to go along with it, they're never going to win the game. And eventually you will win the game because you do have enough insta-cast guys to just keep casting things and breaking towers. So this guy's pretty big versus the Urgon decks to just take cards away from them. He's a 2,000 body, so he's solid. He can be brought back with Yami at instant speed. So like if your opponent's low on cards, or even like if they don't have cards and they're in top deck mode, you can bring him back and rip their card draw for the turn. However, that situation is a little niche and doesn't come up too often. He's still good versus aggro decks. Aggro decks need cards more than anything. So when you're already ahead versus an aggro deck, like, you don't need to play a card that addresses the board. You can kind of just run him down and start taking cards out of their hand, which hurts them a lot, especially versus the Gears deck. The Gears deck does need as many cards as it can get to function. He's solid right on 3 too, because chances are your opponent doesn't have too threatening of a board that you can't just play this guy anyways. My only issue with him is that he doesn't impact the board in any way, so when you're really far behind on board and you're trying to catch up, this guy is not very useful, but that should not be an issue if you're playing him on turn 3 or you're playing him against the control decks. So overall, I have him in there. He is one of the side out cards. He does get sided out for Hellish Guardhound in some of the aggro matchups, because Hellish Guardhound is just far superior to him in those matchups. But we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to the sideboard. Moving on, so we already did Shard Beast. Ah, yes. Yuki, the Lightning Flash. Um, so, this card is very interesting. And by interesting, I mean it's broken. It's just insanely broken, especially in the mirror match. So this card is a 2003 drop with target attack that says if it's in your hand after one of your towers destroyed, you get to put it in play. Wow. So for starters, as I already said in this video, this gets by Shard Beast. You can still put this in play, even if you do have Shard Beast on the board, so that's one huge advantage of her. This card actually completely changes the way that you have to play the game against other decks that have white cards in their deck. This card just absolutely can make or break the aggro mirror matches. There's a specific way you have to play around her. I'll talk about that a little towards the end of the video when I discuss matchups and playing strategy. But you can easily destroy an opponent because they play into her and don't respect her, and you just pop out 1, 2, or if you're a god, you pop out 3 of these and you just kind of obliterate them. Typically when she pops in, what you're going to want to do, if you're playing a mirror match especially, is just start taking trades, leave her up. Don't hit their towers. You don't want to pop in their Yukis and then have their Yukis trade your board off. You're kind of going to do the same strategy you do with the Sola Shard Sword, which is you put this in play, you just kind of sit on them, you trade all their things off, and you start establishing a board, and you don't let them establish a board, but you don't hit towers. And then once you have like a huge board, then you just try to just break through all the towers at once. You won't kill them in one turn, but it's going to set you really far ahead. They're not going to have any board developed, so you don't have to worry about getting screwed over by trades on their turn. And you won't have to worry about getting screwed by their Yukis either if they pop in like 2 or 3 of their own Yukis, and now you have to deal with those. You have these on the board, so once you've established a big board, they pop their Yukis in, and you can just trade your Yukis into theirs and not feel terrible about it, especially if they're not Hoenna, because you're getting counters on your Hoenna and they're not. Moving on. Golem of Allurement. So this guy is a 1500 3-drop that says when it comes in play, you get to take control of a unit with a cost of 1 or less, and that unit cannot attack. So this is huge in this meta right now, because we now have cards like Shard Beast, because decks like this one that are making tokens are starting to get popular. This card becomes huge. So for those of you that don't know, tokens are in fact a 0 cost, so this card can steal tokens, so it's huge in the mirror. It can steal the Sola tokens, it can steal the Hoenna tokens, it can steal the Hikari tokens. It's just a huge card. This card makes big tempo swings. It can steal the Shard Beast, which is really big because he's definitely a difficult guy to deal with. He's a 2000, and that's basically as big as the biggest guy in your deck. This guy has, where this comes up a lot, is he has a lot of synergy with the Omega Magic Yami. Whether you're burying him with the Failed Golem #1, like I mentioned earlier, or you just play him, steal a 1-drop, sack him again with Hidden Laboratory, play him again with Yami. There's so many cool plays you can do. Summoning him at instant speed and just stealing a guy from your opponent's field is a huge tempo swing, especially if it is in fact the Shard Beast. Overall, this guy is solid. He's probably a 2 or 3 of in every dark deck right now because of the prevalence of these aggro decks. One thing I will talk about, I was going to talk about it more in the strategy section, but I guess I'll talk about this. So if you're playing against an Urgon deck and they play Allurement and they take your Shard Beast, you just let them sit on it. You don't care. You just make sure that Shard Beast stays on their board for as long as possible. Don't let them trade it off. Don't kill it with the red tower. Don't bounce it with the wind tower. Just let it stay on their board, because when you shut off their ability to actually play 3-drops or higher, they are not able to compete with you at all. Like, it completely messes them up. And I've played so many games now on Untap where my opponent's playing Urgon, they steal my Shard Beast, and it just ends the game for them on the spot because I never let them kill the Shard Beast. I never let them trade with it. If they're going to take trades, I always make sure I leave the guys that they'll just kill with it, or I'll sack them to Hidden Lab or something. So that's something you got to watch out for. It doesn't matter too much for this deck when you steal a Shard Beast because you don't have too many 3s or higher. It is something you still want to look out for, but it shouldn't come up too much as long as you are paying attention. So finally, the last card, Silver Watchwoman. So Silver Watchwoman is a 2,000 4-drop neutral. She says when you come and play, you can put 2 counters on her. You can remove a counter to give her swiftness, permanent target attack, or prevent the next damage that would be dealt to her. Why this is big is you don't have any other quickness cards in the deck, and where instacast guys fail, that quickness guys come in handy for is the Wind Tower. So the problem is a lot of times when you're swinging for lethal, if you haven't already broken the Wind Tower just gets in the way of your lethal, and there's no way to get around it. It's tokens too, so you don't even get the value. They feel great about bouncing them. So like, say they have just 1 tower left and it's the Wind Tower, well, you can have a board of 3 guys, and that still can't get through the Wind Tower, and it feels bad, especially when they're all tokens. So you have to make 4 guys just to kill them through 1 remaining tower, and that doesn't feel great. So where this guy comes in handy is you break that Wind Tower, they kill your tokens, and then you just come in for game. Or maybe you just need something, 1 extra push, like even the Red Tower can get in your way of lethal, or the Light Tower, you just need an extra guy to come in and kill to finish them off. This card also makes really efficient trades, so you can give it quickness and target attack, so it can trade off stuff. That target attack is permanent too, so it will have that the rest of the game. You can trade into a tapped guy by giving it quickness. You can even prevent the damage, so it can trade into a 2,000 guy without dying. Overall, this card is really good. You do need a little bit of top end, especially versus the Ergon decks, where you are a lot of the times going to see yourself getting to turn 5, turn 6. This card's solid. I do side a third one of it, but we'll talk about that more with the sideboard. So moving on to the Shard deck. Shard deck is pretty simple. You have 3 Hallowed Crystal. Hallowed Crystal says you can tap it and pay 1 to give a guy with Guardian plus 500. Where this comes up most frequently is with the Hikari tokens. They're only 1,000s, but usually at the point in the game where you summon them, you have a ton of open mana, so you get to summon them, and kind of before you're before you're swinging with them, you have these open, you pump them up to 15s, and then you can break any towers with them. It does come up a few times with Sola and the Light Tower token where you might want to pump them to make more efficient trades or more efficient blocks, and it might come up with the Golem of Devourment, where you just want, he's blocking a 1,000 and you just want him to survive, you don't want him to die. Those are few and far between. Its main application, like I said, is just making the Hikari tokens 1500s, and everything else is just kind of icing on the cake. There is a Corona the Spirit Ruby in here. It's not in Lackey yet, and I was not able to upload it before this video. Corona the Spirit Ruby just says it produces 1 like any shard. It says you can tap it and break your spirit to destroy any guy on the board. I chose that one. There's no reason not to play it. You have to play either one of the 3, so either that, the kite one, or the the fizzy one. The kite one isn't very good. It just gives you an extra mana, so that's not really worth it in this deck. I'm still determining whether I like Fizzy or Corona better. Being able to destroy a guy is sometimes really relevant when there's a big blocker in the way, or there's just a huge guy that you know is going to cause problems for you. The problem is that most of the time breaking Sola for the 2,000 attacker is usually better, so no matter which one you play, it's not going to come up too often. I will try the Fizzy to see if drawing 2 matters. Usually I don't have too much of a problem with card advantage unless I don't see Hidden Lab. As long as I have Hidden Lab, you shouldn't be running out of cards unless you're just your opponent's just like playing a huge value game, or maybe your opponent is getting really good trades on you. But if you have Hidden Lab, that shouldn't be happening. So I think the card matters very minimally. Of course, you're going to play it because there's no reason not to play it. But I have yet to determine if I like the Corona or Fizzy one. Right now, though, like I said, I'm playing Corona, and I would definitely not play Kite. So moving on, we are going to go to the side deck. So the side deck, guys, is a little incomplete. I shouldn't say incomplete. It has 15 cards, but I'm not sure if these are the 15 cards I'm going to go with. It might change by a few. I'm not really sure yet because there aren't a lot of great options. Like, I'm very limited in what I can use. Obviously, most of the late cards revolve around gears, and this isn't a gears deck. So my options of siding late cards is kind of very limited, and a lot of the dark cards are the rest of them are too top heavy, and we don't really want to play anything above the cost of 4 in this deck. So getting into it, 3 Brainwipe Beam. I'm pretty sure this card comes in, I feel like it comes in versus Ergon and even the Mirror. This is a card I've been debating if it goes in the main or not. So it's a big tempo swing. It kills one of their guys and takes it for yourself. That's pretty huge. You can steal. Ideal targets are like Shard Beast, their Sola token. The best one, actually, so if you're playing against the Mirror, a huge one is Golem of Devourment. So you get to steal Golem of Devourment, and then when it dies, you get to summon your copy of Golem of Devourment from the deck. So you not only have 4 Golem of Devourments, but you cut them off from their own, so they don't get to start their chain of devourments, and I think that's going to be pretty big, especially in the Mirror match, where you don't really have an efficient way to deal with Golem of Devourment, and he can kind of wall you. So I think this card could come in the main for Dust Strike. I could see 2 of this being in for the 2 Dust Strike. I need to test it more. Versus Ergon, it's a nice tempo swing. You get to maybe take a Guard Hound or something that's in your way. Overall, I think this card is pretty solid. This one, like I said, is in consideration for the main, but this is probably one that's staying in the side no matter what. 2 Quorum Squires. So I actually, against the Ergon decks, I actually take out Yuki. Yuki isn't very good versus the Ergon decks because they don't really break towers early, and they don't, by the time they do break towers, they can just Sylvia you. So what they'll do is, if they're smart, they'll leave before playing anything. They just have all their mana open. They'll do their tower breaks like anyone would. And if you pop in Yuki's and they have Sylvia, they just go, okay, Sylvia. Now she's just kind of collateral damage with the Sylvia, and they took free cards out of your hand. You're also sitting on the you're also sitting on the Yukis in hand, so say you do open 2 or 3 Yukis, or even 1 Yuki, you just have a dead card in your hand that you don't get to do anything with until turn 4, and then just having it get Sylvia'd feels really bad. So you're going to bring in 2 of these for 2 of your Yukis, and then you'll take the other one out for the Quorum Assassin here, but we'll get to that in a sec. Really, versus Ergon, you're just going to want the most aggressive start possible, so hitting a 1-drop is very important. You have 9 1s. Kind of going wide in the early game is really important, so you can try to get through and break those towers, so you don't get stonewalled by Golem of Devourments, so you have as many attacks as possible, and you're able to kind of break a few towers early, because a lot of the Ergon matchup is going to be trying to take 2 to 3 towers early, and then finishing them off by casting guys at instant speed to play around their Sylvia. They do get their shit together eventually, so you need to try to win the game as fast as possible, and this card is just better for that than Yuki is. Moving on. 3 Acid Monger. At this point, most of you should know this card is kind of a staple in every sideboard. If you don't know what this card does, it just says when it comes in play, it's a 2 cost, 1,000, it destroys an augment. It still breaks to 1,000 towers. So where this comes in, I don't even think this comes in against Liam. I'm unsure so far. Where this actually comes in, though, is versus Mono Air, because you absolutely have to destroy the command center. I'm not even sure that Mono Air is a great matchup for this until you bring this card in. So Mono Air, for you guys who don't know, is kind of a combo deck, and a big part of their combo is using Command Center to just keep infinitely looping their bounce cards like Garga, Sylvia, and Great Hawk on your turn. and kind of just using those cards to tempo you out, using them to break a tower, and then bouncing them back with Kite on their turn, and just keeping their command centers up. So as long as they have command center, they get to keep insta-casting guys like you, but their guys are actually removing things. And because your guys are all tokens, you don't actually get any value on them bouncing your stuff back. Like, it's not like it's not like Avarice where they bounce it and you get to replay it and discard another card. They get to free bounce your stuff and just keep doing that and breaking towers. So you need a way to disable command center. It's kind of like the centerpiece of their combo, and without it, they're not able to tempo you as efficiently. This guy still does break towers, so he breaks the 1,000 towers, which is nice. So he's not totally useless. You would probably... I'm not quite sure what I would take out for him yet. It'd probably be Golem of Devourment, only because you don't really need blockers versus Mono Wind. Blockers are kind of slow, and they get bounced a lot. They have so many bounce cards that you don't really want to put... blockers on the board because they're just kind of free bounce targets. So this probably comes in for your 3 Golem of Devourment. 1 Quorum Assassin. He's just another swiftness guy or quickness guy. You just need quickness guys versus the Urgon deck. So in the late game, Urgon usually does go to the late game, and a big part of what's going to help you is the quickness guys, and that's because cards like Sylvia are clearing your board every turn, and you need guys that can just come in and attack immediately. Of course, they have quick cast guys. You have quick cast guys, but this is just additional icing on the cake, especially for scenarios, like I said, where you need to get through the wind tower, the red tower, and win the game. So he's just another guy. I don't foresee you leaving the Shard Sword in, so don't really worry about trying to kill a guy with his effect. I think you're going to end up taking the Shard Sword out in the Urgon matchup for the Finishing Ray. Maybe you do leave 1 Shard Sword in, and that does come up, but don't worry about his effect. He's just a 2,000 quickness guy. That is the main function of him. 3 Hellish Guardhounds, as I discussed in the main deck. This is typically going to come in versus the aggro decks for... what is it? You're going to put this in for the Golem of Avarice. Golem of Avarice doesn't impact the board. This card allows you to block and indefinitely locks down an attacker. So it guarantees that one guy cannot deal damage next turn, and it gets to block another guy. It's just a pretty big tempo swing against other aggro decks, and it's definitely a pain to deal with, especially if you are Liam. So I think this comes in... These 3 come in for the 3 Avarice in any aggro matchup. 1 Silver Watchwoman. She's also coming in versus Urgon. You just need more quickness guys, more late game, because the game does tend to run later. You can probably cut a Golem of Allurement for her, as Golem of Allurement does not do as much versus the Urgon match, since they are not as reliant on their 1-drops, and chances are they're only playing like 3 or 4 of them, so you don't really want to go as hard on Golem of Allurement. The same can be said probably for the Brainwipe Beam. If you do bring Brainwipe Beam in, you can pull out another Golem of Allurement. I'd leave just 1 in probably, because you can search it with your Failed Golem and bring it back with Yami, and it might come up. So I might leave 1 in, unless like they're only playing 3 1-drops and you don't think they're that relevant, then you can take all of them out. But like I said, I'd probably leave 1 in. 2 Finishing Ray. This is a testing card. I don't know how great it's going to be. So my theory with this is this comes in versus Urgon and maybe some of the other control decks. Urgon decks get to a point where when they establish dominance, they just start going wide because they know there's no way you can punish them. So once they've kind of cleared your board and you're running low on cards, they just can going ham on the board. And this kind of can buy you time to start establishing a board back up again. Now, it does wipe your own board, but if you're at the point in the game where you're playing this, you probably don't have a board, so you don't have to worry about that. You can still quick cast your tokens with this, or insta-cast your tokens. So this guy, basically, it comes in against Urgon for the Shard Sword. The sword isn't great versus Urgon because they they don't play a ton of guys early on, and even when they do, a lot of times it's things like devourment, so the sword's not able to target attack what it wants to. They're going to be using more things like delayed poison, brainwipe beam to kind of slow you down in the early game, or devourments, none of which the shard sword really works well against, so you're going to put this in for that. The idea is hopefully they go wide. Usually they do because they need to win the game. They haven't really been breaking towers the whole game, so they have to start going wide to kind of speed up the process of winning the game. They can't give you forever, especially if they're low on towers. Ideally, they'll only have 1 or 2 towers remaining when they get to this point in the game, and they know that you top decking the quickness guys is going to be an issue for them. This, you just get to wipe out everything. If you do have a quickness guy to play with it, so you are on turn 8, you get to play one of your mentioned quickness guys and just kind of go in and break another tower. It also takes them time to build up a board. Like I said, they don't have unlimited cards, so if you hit a board of 3, 4, even 5 guys with this, it's a huge setback for them, and it allows you to maybe come back in the game. Now, if you're down, you only have like 1 tower broken or 2 towers broken, this card probably isn't going to save you the game realistically, unless you have just like a billion counters on Hoenna. So it is a comeback card, but it's not like an ultimate comeback card where I can just be losing the whole game and all of a sudden it's back in my favor. It also makes them, when they know you have this, when they see this the first time game 2, maybe you lost game 1, you win game 2 with this, and you go into game 3, now they're forced to respect this card. Just the fear of having this card, it changes the way your opponent has to play, because they can't go as wide. And by them not going as wide, they're not actually able to win the game as fast, giving you more time. So this card kind of does its job without even actually being played. Just by being in the deck, it kind of serves the purpose of a threat to your opponent. Now, your opponent can just be ignorant and say, well, I don't care about finishing Ray, and go wide as possible, and you just don't see this, and you get punished anyways. But I would say more often than not, at least from my perspective, this is a card I know I have to respect if I'm in Ergon deck and I'm playing against you. So that's the list. And like I said, this comes in for the Shard Sword. That's the list. We'll talk a little bit about the mulligans now. And how I think you should actively play against certain decks. 1 second, guys. Cool. I had to make sure this was still recording. I've had a bunch of audio issues as of recent, or OBS issues. Jeez. Come on. There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the moles and the strategy. So I guess the first thing I'll talk about here, since I mentioned it earlier, how do we play around Yuki? And this is huge. So one of the things that I think is really going to separate the good players from the bad ones at the upcoming championship in Indianapolis is how well they respect Yuki. So when you're playing against a deck that you see has light, whether it be Hoenna Sola, whether it be Liam Kite, whether it be Gillian Sola, basically just anything with light in it. Anything with light should be playing this card for the most part. Now, because this card is so expensive and it's only available to those who back the Kickstarter or got like the kits in, it's not readily available. It's very expensive, so you can expect a lot of people will not have it. That is going to set them at a huge disadvantage over you, and just knowing your opponent doesn't have this card allows you to play the game so much more freely. So if one thing you want to do is you never want to tell your opponent you don't play Yuki, because they get to just ape you. Like, they just get to go absolutely ham on you when they know you don't play Yuki. And maybe they do that anyways, because they just don't know how to play around Yuki. But this is definitely a huge deterrent to that. This card is an auto keep. If you know you're playing against an aggro deck, you auto keep this card. You auto keep any number of them. Maybe at 3, you want to throw one away, and the only reason I say that is if you are playing against an intelligent player, they might be able to respect this a little bit better, where the 3 cards are just dead. But if you have like a 1, a 2, and 3 of this, that's an auto keep. There's no way you throw that away. Worst case scenario, you can just hard caster on 3, and it's not even terrible. Okay, so the main thing here, playing around Yuki. So how you're going to want to play around Yuki, especially if you go second, is you don't really want to be hitting towers willy-nilly. So let's say I go second. They play a 1-drop, I play a 1-drop. I don't have Yukis in hand, right? I don't want to be, so they swing at me, maybe they break a tower, maybe they don't, it doesn't matter. I want to just be focusing on trying to take trades, because I'm already playing the behind game, so I'm not going to win a race because they went first and they're always just up a guy on me. They're able to play ahead on curve, so trying to win the race here isn't really beneficial either way, Yuki or not. I don't want these Yukis to pop out until I can deal with them. So like at 2 mana, if they just pop out 2 Yukis, it's going to be really hard to deal with them. And this is where Delayed Poison comes in that I mentioned earlier. Delayed Poison against the aggro decks is an auto keep card. You keep this card every time because it is able to remove Yuki, especially versus the Yuki decks. You keep this every time because it's a way to remove Yuki. So ideally what you want to do is try to get to Delayed Poison, or maybe try to get to a standard Shard Sword and you have like the Rhina or the Shard Beast and you can put it on there and trade Yuki, or maybe you have Dust Strike. Whatever you do not want to break a tower until you have at least one way to remove a Yuki. Like you need to get rid of at least one of those Yukis on the spot. So you might see yourself going, okay, I play a 1-drop, I went second, he plays his 2-drop. Okay, I'm going to trade into their guy. If I'm able to, they probably untapped it with Sola. If that's the case, you just don't attack at all. You don't want to run into these Yukis and get blown out. Now, say you do have 2 Delayed Poisons in hand, yeah, go nuts. Hit their tower, they drop 2 Yukis in, you Delayed Poison them both. That's great, that's 2 cards out of their hand. It's 2 cards out of your hand, but maybe you have your own Yuki, then they swing, you pop in your own Yukis, and you're just very happy about it. Now, if you do have Yukis in your hand, what you kind of want to do is bait them into hitting you first, popping your Yukis out, and then using those Yukis to board control. So how you'll play from there is, let's say you get 1 or 2 Yukis. Your opponent goes first, they hit your tower, they break it, you pop in your Yukis. Now instead of hitting your towers, those Yukis start trading and they never hit towers, and you kind of just do the same strategy we discussed before, where all you do is you leave these Yukis up and you just trade every guy they play off every turn, and you just amass a huge board while you're trading all their guys off with the Yukis. And then you just kind of start going in. Once you have like a 5-wide board and enough counters on your Hoenna established, you just start going in. You don't care about their Yukis at this point, because when their Yukis pop in, you have your own Yukis to target attack into their Yukis if you want to take the trade. You ideally have like a Shard Beast or an Avarice or something that can trade into the Yukis that pop in, or you have Delayed Poisons in hand because you've been doing nothing but just drawing and playing your creatures out. So at this point, they're not able to pop their Yukis in. They're sitting on dead cards in hand, so they don't even have a full hand. Say they do have 2 Yukis and a hand of 5, they're only really playing with a 3-card hand. Now, not only do you get to kill their Yukis as soon as they came in and get counters, you also get to take a huge tower lead, and this is big. So that's part of the reason you really can't let your opponent get their Yukis before yours in, because they're able to just start controlling your board, and it's really hard for you to come back when your opponent drops 2 Yukis on you and you just don't have an answer for them on the spot. Now, if you go first, dealing with Yuki's a little easier. I still don't suggest swinging on your turn 2 if you played a 1-drop, unless you do have that removal, but it's a little bit easier because you are up a mana and you are able to establish creatures a little bit faster and maybe trade these off. Like I said, you don't really want to be hitting towers while you don't have ways to clear Yuki. You just want to focus on trading off the board, and that's still beneficial to you because you are accumulating counters on your Hoenna. You're actually incentivized to take trades with this deck, especially when you do have the Shard Sword, and that's part of the reason we play it, is so you are able to give a guy target attack and make trades while respecting Yuki. Something I want to talk a little bit about too is knowing when your opponent does and doesn't have Yuki. Assuming your opponent is not just going to tell you right away, oh yeah, I couldn't afford Yukis, man, that sucks, which is huge. Don't ever do that. Like, never tell your opponent you don't have Yukis. Now, you don't want to be unsportsmanlike and lie and be like, yeah, of course I have Yukis, but you definitely don't want to tell them you don't have Yukis. So a way you can tell if your opponent has Yuki in their hand is, so when you start getting to turns like 3 and 4, provided you haven't been hitting towers up to this point, you'll be able to kind of gauge how many they have in hand. Like if they have a 4-card hand and it's turn 3 and they're only able to play a 1-drop, that kind of tells you, okay, they have a bunch of cards they can't play in hand, so there's a good chance there's Yukis. Or if they're on like turn 4, they only play like a 2-drop, they leave something open, okay, there's a good chance they're sitting on Yukis. Most people shuffle their hand, so you're never going to be able to tell based on, it's not like Hearthstone where you can tell what cards they've had since what turn. But you can kind of get an idea when they deplete their hand and, oh, they've had 2 cards in their hand this whole game and it's turn 5 and they still have 2 cards in hand and they're not playing anything. What could those be? Okay, those are Yukis. Now, this is very late in the game, so at this point you've probably already made a decision about whether or not you want to respect Yuki or not, but it does give you a better idea. You can also tell by your opponent's mole strategies. If my opponent's playing, say, the mirror match, and they keep 5 cards, I have an idea that there's some amount of Yukis in there. That Yuki is an auto keep in the mirror, so if they're keeping 4 or 5 cards, you should think that there's at least 1 Yuki in there. It is a card you do want to aggressively mull for, so I think it would be safe to assume that there is a Yuki in there. Now, when you see your opponent doing something like sending all, if they send all 5 or maybe they send 4, then you can say, okay, maybe they have just 1 Yuki. Obviously, they can mull into them, but you know they didn't start with them, so there's a better chance that they don't have Yuki. And this is where paying attention to what your opponent mulls is where that's really important, and knowing what the chances are. Like, I know if my opponent goes keep all 5 and I know they're competent, there's at least 1 Yuki, at the very minimum 1 Yuki in their hand. In my mind, I'm thinking 2 even. So just knowing how to respect Yuki and how to play around her is huge. So we're going to get to the final segment of this video. I hope I didn't miss anything I promised you guys. And that's the mull guide and kind of how you're going to play against decks. So we're just going to go ahead and load this deck in here, and we're going to draw a few test hands. So here's our Hoenna Sola. I know I forgot to explain these earlier in the video, so for those of you who don't know, the champion is Hoenna. She says whenever you destroy a tower or a unit in battle, you place a counter on her. That does count when your opponent trades into your guys, so like if your opponent attacks into one of your guys and both guys die, you still get the counter. And then you can remove 3 counters at instant speed to summon a guy. Typically, you're using this to summon guys at the end of their turn so they can't remove them with their non-instant speed removal, mainly Sylvia. Then you have Sola the Light Spirit. For those of you who don't know, this card says at the end of your turn, you untap one of your tapped guys, which is huge because you are an aggressive deck, and what your opponent is going to try to do is trade into your tapped guys, and this basically prevents them from doing so. It also says you can break it, you can soul burst it to put in play a 2,000 token with blocker. This is huge for doing things like in the mirror, where your opponent taps out and they swing with a guy who's less than 2,000. You just break it, put it in, block, no cares in the world. You get a counter on Hoenna. You can break it turn 1 sometimes when you have the Shard Sword and you're playing a mirror match and you know your opponent can't out it. So there's a lot of applications for this. The main time you use the Soul Burst is just when you're going for game and you just need another body at quick cast on the board. So we'll get into the mulls here. I'm going to move my computer to the side here, or my camera to the side. Okay, so sorry on this isn't sized correctly because the image I use is of a weird size, so you'll have to forgive me, guys. All right, so for this one example, we're going to pretend like we are playing against the we'll say the mirror here. So for the mirror, we're going to want to keep the Shard Beast and the delayed poison. This gives us a 1. We have our Yuki removal, so we don't have to worry about as much about Yuki. We're going to keep the hidden lab here. because it's just the best card in your deck. Like I said, it's the solid 2-drop. So you have your removal for Yuki. You have your Raging Shard Beast. So you see 2 Golem of Allurements here. Now you have a full curve. So that's pretty nice. So you can almost keep a Golem of Allurement if you want. It's really good in the mirror. So if I were playing the mirror, I would consider keeping it here. I don't have any Yukis, and I'd like to see a Yuki if possible. But because we're not really sending a full curve here, and we have ways to deal with Yukis on our own, and we're not sending the full hand back, I will just send 1. I have a full curve here, so I'm not going to get greedy. I'm just going to send the 1 back. And we got another one anyway, so it didn't actually matter. Actually, did we send that to the bottom of the deck? I think we sent that to the bottom, but we got another one either way. So ideally how you're going to want to play, we'll pretend like I went first. I play the Beast here. This is still the mirror. I'm going to pass. It doesn't matter if they play a 1-drop or not. We'll draw for turn. So they play a 1-drop. If it's their own the Beast, you can kind of just leave it there because you have Allurement and you know you're going to get a chance to steal it later on. You're not going to attack. Yeah, you're probably not going to attack just yet because you want to establish this hidden lab and you don't want to have to use Yuki immediately. Now, you do have a delayed poison, so maybe if you didn't have this hidden lab here, you could maybe think about attacking. If they start with a 1-drop, I'd probably err on the side of caution. But if they don't start a 1-drop, you're not going to get too blown out by them dropping 2 Yukis here. They drop 2 Yukis, and you get to delayed poison one of them. The only downside, though, is if you do hit the Dark Tower or the Light Tower, they're going to be up an extra body, or they're going to get to rip your delayed poison, so that's something you have to be careful of. So even if I didn't have this hidden lab, I would probably opt just not to run into them, only because I don't really want to hit the Dark or Light Tower and then be in trouble. So we're just going to play this. We're going to get our 3 counters. We're going to pass. We're going to pretend like they hit a tower. We'll just say, for simplicity's sake, it's the red one, or the wind one. I bounce their guy. I don't have any Yuki, so I'm not, unless they have like a big board presence here, I'm not going to put the token in yet because I don't feel like I want to hit towers just yet. If I don't see a 1-drop, there's consideration for making the token here just so my Avarice can get the discard next turn, so I don't have to sit on no play for the turn. If they do have a 1-drop, you don't make the Golem for sure. The only reason you don't really want to make the Golem is because you're not probably going to be cracking towers next turn unless I draw another piece of removal, and you don't just want the Golem sitting vulnerable. Let's assume in this scenario they don't have a 1-drop. And I'm going to take the riskier player, and I am going to make the token here, so we'll make the token. We'll draw the card. Okay, so we did get the Omega Magic Hikari. That's not going to matter much now. That's going to come up much in the late game, and it does come up much faster in the mirrors because they do break towers faster. So here I'm just going to run the Avarice out. I'm not breaking towers yet. They don't have a lot of removal. We'll say it's their go. They don't have a guy, or they do have a guy. Let's say maybe they played Hidden Lab. They break one of my towers. Okay, they break, we'll say, the red tower this time. I kill their guy. Now I'm going to draw. Okay, so that's not a great draw. But now I feel like I have a sufficient amount enough to start kind of dealing with Yukis here. I have 2 2000s established. So if they're trading into guys that trade with the Yuki, so I'm kind of okay with that. If they swing into this guy here, I just get to sack it, so they're not getting counters, and they are, what is it? I'm still drawing a card. They're not getting an efficient trade. So now I'll start hitting towers. You're going to want to hit with the token first. So if they do get the wind tower, if you do hit the wind tower here, they're going to want to bounce back the Rhino or the Shard Beast and the Avarice, and you get to just replay those guys and not feel as bad about it. Or you can replay one of them. They do pop their Yukis. You cast your, let's say they get 2, you cast your delayed poison. You're still going to keep going in at towers as long as you're not going to get too blown out here. You can even hit the light one, and then you get your allurement becomes live, and you get to steal that light one, and now you have a blocker. So ideally, that's something you want to do. You don't want to hit the dark one right away because losing the delayed poison is big, but it's only a 1 in 5, so it's not a huge chance of it happening. Unfortunately, there's no way to respect the Dark Tower. If it happens, it just happens. But if you do, Light Tower is ideal because you have a 5-wide board, you have a blocker, and even if they start killing things, you can pop out Sola and block a Yuki and trade. So you just have tons of plays here. And then you kind of, like I said, this is the strategy where you start just going in at towers and breaking stuff. And you have all these quick cast things here. Now you have Yami. You have this guy. You're at 5 you're at your 5 shards, so you're able to play this failed golem and set up your Yami for the following turn. Ideally, they've broken 3 towers of yours now, and your Hikari's now got its bonus effect. So this is just kind of how you're gonna kill them to give you an idea. You're gonna play very similarly versus the Liam decks. The only difference is you'll probably get a few more trades versus the Liam decks because their guys are always tapping down. So versus the Liam decks, the strategy is basically the same. The moles are the same because you're still respecting Yuki. You want, like I said, you want to take trades versus the Liam deck. You cannot leave guys on board. Their deck gets so much scarier when you actually do that, but you also need to be wary that they can pump their guys at instant speed with Liam, so you have to be careful of that. Overall, the strategy, though, is kind of the same versus that deck. You have to be careful, a little more careful when flipping Sola early to try to block because they're okay with just sacrificing their kite, and that's a great deal for them. Honestly, your Sola is more valuable to you, more than likely, than their kite is to them. So you just got to be careful when you flip Solom against the Liam kite decks. Whereas versus the mirror, you can kind of flip this a little more willy-nilly to just like when you see like a good value trade or something. So moving on, so we'll do new game here. So we're gonna, let's see. Oh, come on. So we're gonna do the Urgon matchup, or just we'll do Urgon because that's the most popular control deck right now. So this is just game 1. So, okay, we have a pretty decent hand. We're going to want to always throw Golem of Devourment versus Urgon. We don't really need blockers. We're always going to want to throw Allurement. We don't have a lot of 1-drops to steal. Shard Sword is okay because if they play a 1-drop, you can kind of trade it with Sola. But I think I'm going to throw it away here. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's like a card that you don't keep in your opening, but you're not upset if it just finds its way in there after moles. So this is a pretty alright hand. We're going to... So we'll assume we're going first again. We're going to play this guy first because we can see we have Jealousy and we're going to want to draw the card. We're going to draw. Oh, that's a pretty good one. This card's great versus, what is it, Urgon. So you can just ape in on them. Just start hitting towers. You always hit your guy before you attack. Now, it's going to suck if you hit the red tower here because they destroy it. Because they get to destroy this, and then you don't have a really great play. But if they do that, this is one of the instances where you don't feel bad about playing the Philosopher's Stone and just getting a 2-drop guy. You kind of are just going to let that sit there. You're not going to summon anything with it, more than likely. If you want to, you can summon a Failed Golem number 1 at the end of their turn, and then you can summon another one again at the end of their next turn. Or you can just keep the 2 in the bank and summon a Jealousy the next time you get a Golem down. If you hit the Wind Tower, what you're going to do is they're going to bounce this back, and then you're just going to summon both your 1-drops. And then if you hit any other tower, you're just going to play the Jealousy. I'm just going to play the mathematically probable odds and say I didn't hit a tower that breaks. So this guy taps, he untaps at the end of the turn, we draw a card, we go for our turn, and now it's turn 3. we start doing the same thing. We just go in. We're going to want to play Avarice here more than likely, but breaking towers is the most important thing, so you attack first. Let's say we are probably going to succeed in hitting one of the towers, so let's just say it's the wind tower. They bounce both these guys back, and you already got 1,000 tower, but these guys are just efficient, so you're just going to play them again. You're okay with that. You draw a card here, and you just keep pressure on the board. I'm going to draw another card. Yeah, so now this hand is just great. Like, look, this is just a solid hand to just keep putting pressure on your opponent. We go in again, we'll say. The nice thing, too, is, so one of these guys untapped, even if they did kill one, like, say they did, they're probably going to kill the Jealousy. You're okay with that. So let's say, for argument's sake, they kill Jealousy on your turn. You're okay because you have Philosopher's Stone and you want guys in the grave. You have Yami, so you want guys in the grave. Let's say they just established a decent-sized guy here because it's their turn 3. So we're going to put that down, and we're going to run into a tower before we put that down, so we give them less information. We put this down on their guy, and we just play the Avarice. We want to start ripping cards away from them, and we never feel bad about it. If they have a huge hand, it's more than likely that they haven't been playing anything, which is great. This guy should have like 2 counters if we broke 2 towers, or if we broke 1 tower like we planned to. So if they have like a huge grip, it's fine because that means they haven't been playing anything, and you can still just rip the best card out of their hand. Don't get discouraged just because your opponent has a 7-card hand. It does say a random card, so you can just take the 1 in 7 where you just take the Sylvia out of their hand and they tapped out, and now they can't pick up Sylvia on their turn, so that's another turn. Another important thing, and I didn't do this here because I wasn't able to, is weaving drops, guys. I cannot stress enough the importance of weaving the cost of your guys. And what I mean by that is, so these are both odds. So Sylvia just bottom decks both these guys. In an ideal world, you'll have some 2 drops, or you'll have some even guys. Remember, 0 cost or even. So like here, for example, my opponent just gets a clean Sylvia. Whereas if I had, say, like an even guy, like I have one in my grave, so another play I could make, say they don't have a guy on the board, instead of playing Avarice, I can respect Sylvia, just swing with this. Maybe I break a tower, maybe I don't. But what I can do is, instead of, instead of casting Avarice, I can, what do I do here? I can cast the 1-drop. I can still cast the delayed poison, kill something, and then I can leave a Yami open. So at the end of my turn, I'm still able to get a Golem of Jealousy, or if they go to tap out and Sylvia me, they name even. I play Jealousy in response, so I still get the draw. Yami goes to grave, and I'm left with a guy at the end of the turn, and then I can even Sola at the end of the turn, so I have 2 guys, and I can start breaking more towers and going in. So how you want to weave drops, ideally, is you never want 3 guys. You want an even number of guys, because it doesn't make much sense to put down 2 odds and an even. Like, 1 even and 1 odd is just as good as 2 odds and 1 even, or vice versa. So you want to do them in even numbers, because it's not going to matter. You're just throwing them free cards. So if you can have 4 guys, 2 of them are even, 2 of them are odd, that's great. Or just 2 guys, 1 even, 1 odd. You can kind of weave in and out of the Sylvia. So Sylvia, they're tapping out to play Sylvia in the early games most of the time. So like they play her on 4 and they only have 1 mana open. They can't really do anything with 1 mana. They play her on 5, they have 2 mana. They don't have much to do for 2 mana. So it's when you leave 1 guy on the board, especially a guy that's like a 15 or higher that can break towers every time, it's a huge liability because that guy keeps getting through and adding counters to your Hoenna. So it's really big that you do that. Where you can get hosed pretty badly is when they establish Professor Rudy and you can't remove him, and then Sylvia gets to clear your whole board every turn. You're able to instacast guys still, but if you didn't break towers early enough or you didn't see Hidden Lab, you're going to run out of gas real fast. I cannot stress the importance of Hidden Lab enough, guys. Hidden Lab is like one of the biggest cards in this deck. You definitely want to see Hidden Lab. Now, if you have a curve, don't throw away your curve just to get Hidden Lab. If you have a 1, a 2, and a 3, and it's looking okay, there's no reason to just go, oh, I'm going to go ape for Hidden Lab. So that's kind of a little rundown of how you play against the Ergon deck. In the late game, you're going to want to try to break towers early, and just like any other deck, you're going to kind of want to save your quick cast stuff for the late game. Now, you obviously play these if you have nothing else to play, like you need to keep tempo up. But if you have other plays that aren't your ways to instacast guys, you're going to want to save them till later on, because they're going to be big when they have Sylvia loops going, and your non instacast guys are just getting Sylvia'd every turn, or they're able to play 2 Sylvias, or they do have the Rudy down. So I can't emphasize enough how important instacast guys are, and how important it is to just leave the counters sometimes on Hoenna. Like when you Hidden Lab them, if you already have guys and you already have tempo going, just leave the counters on there. They're going to be a lot more helpful later when you need to instacast guys versus when you can just play guys at non-quick cast. So like if you have a 1-drop, and then if you have like a 1 and a 3 in Hidden Lab, you can sometimes play the 1, say the 1 does break a tower, you can leave the counters on Hoenna and just play your 3 instead and kind of go in with that. Now, if you break the wind tower, I probably would summon the token, only because the biggest liability is out of the way and you can kind of start putting pressure on them. But if you break like the red one, you can kind of just leave the token in the bank for later on. If you don't break anything, maybe you want to summon the token just to start putting pressure on, but then again, the wind tower is still there, so you got to be wary of that. It really just depends on your hand. Like if you have a full curve and your opponent's like starting slow, they're not seeing a 1, they're not seeing a 2, you can say, okay, I can save these counters for later when I know they're going to be relevant when this guy has Sylvia, because that's the card you're most worried about, is Sylvia. Most of the other cards you're not too scared of. You don't want to see Golem of Devourment, but that's kind of where cards like Brainwipe Beam are going to come in play. You are going to side in Brainwipe Beam. For those of you who missed the side portion, so versus the Ergon decks, you're going to want to side in the Brainwipe Beams. More than likely for the 3 Allurements, you're going to want to side in the Silver Watchwoman and the Quorum Assassin in the Finishing Ray. You're going to want to take out your standard Shard Swords for the 2 Finishing Ray. You're going to want to take out your You're going to want to take out your 3 Yukis for the 2 Quorum Squire and the 1 Quorum Assassin. And then you can probably cut all 3 Allurements for the 3 Brainwipe Beams. I like to leave an Allurement in, but if it looks like your opponent's playing like a 1-drop late deck, like if it looked like they only maybe had 3 1-drop 1-drop late deck. If it looked like they only have 3 1-drops, just take all the Allurements out and put all the Brainwipe Beams in. I cannot emphasize the importance of this guy against Golem of Devourment and just general tempo. Like, stealing a Rudy is huge. Like, you can actually do some gross things with Rudy in this deck. Like, Hidden Lab, so Rudy says any enter abilities, so Hidden Lab actually gets 6 counters when it comes in play, and that's just gross. This card is disgusting as it is. When you're getting 6 counters, it's extra disgusting. And then you have a few other things like Jealousy, Avarice, just small things, but taking it away from them is the main thing, and them not having access to it. Versus the other aggro decks, you're probably going to not really... You might side... So you're going to side in Hellish Guardhound for the 3 Avarice. That happens every time. And then you can bring in the Brainwipe Beams. You can maybe cut Dust Strike if you feel like it wasn't working out or it didn't feel great. You can probably cut 2 Dust Strike for 2 Brainwipe Beam. You can maybe cut... yeah, you can probably just go with the... cut the 2 Dust Strikes for the Brainwipe Beams. If you felt like if you feel Philosopher's Stone is too slow even, or it's not going to matter, you can put in the 3rd Brainwipe Beam for that. I might even cut... This Quorum Assassin honestly might come out for just a 3rd Hikari. I don't know if I want 3 in the main. I know that Hikari's a lot better versus Ergon, so that might just come in here versus the versus Ergon. I feel like there's a really high possibility. I'll post updates later if that is the case, where I do end up putting in the Hikari over this, but it's very likely. This is just an Ergon card. It doesn't do much else, and I'm not even sure I need that many quickness guys. The third Silver Watchwoman might just be enough. And then finally, the Acid Monger is really only coming in against the mono air decks because of their command center and because of what that does for the deck. I haven't determined if I want to put Acid Monger in versus the Liam deck. You probably do, only because you can't really let the War Room run away with its, like, the Core Room just kind of runs away with the War Room kind of runs away with the game if you let a bunch of them go unchecked. So you probably do end up siding. In fact, I'm going to make the decision and say yes, you do end up siding it, and you'll probably can cut the Golem of Jealousies. It is still good versus them, but it doesn't make trades efficiently, which is a lot of what you want to do versus the Liam deck. It still draws cards, but like I said, trades are a little more important than the actual cards versus Liam. So I would say you cut 3 Golem of Jealousy. This guy is still the same stats, and he still typically replaces himself. So you'll put 3 of this in for the Golem of Jealousy when you're playing against Liam. And that's all I would put in versus them outside of the Brainwave Beams and the Guardhounds. You don't really need these haste guys, and you don't need Finishing Ray. It's too slow, and usually they only have 1 or 2 guys anyways, and you have a board as is, so it's never really worth playing. This is strictly just for the control decks for a chance to come back, and this card might come out anyways. The final thing I'm going to go over is, because this is a new format, this is for the new format, as you guys may have noticed, a lot of people have messaged me and asked me, hey Alex, I can't afford Yukis, or I need this for my local tomorrow. What do I do? So, in the case that you don't have, in the case that you want to play this as soon as possible, and it's still good, I would recommend having Yuki, but without Shard Beast. You cut the 3 Shard Beasts, and what you'll do is you'll end up cutting them, and you'll put in 2 more Quorum Squires. So you're going to want to cut 2. You're going to cut 2 of the standard Shard Swords and the Beasts. You're going to put in 2 Quorum Squires for those standard Shard Swords. You want to keep at least 6 1-drops. This deck has to hit 1-drops, so keeping the 6 1-drops is important. And then for the 3 Shard Beasts, you can either put in 3 Brainwipe Beams or 3 of the Hellish Guardhounds, and you don't feel bad about that. You have more 3-drops now, but you don't have Shard Beasts, so you don't have to worry about not being able to play those. I think that's really a meta call for you. For me personally, I probably like the Brainwipe Beams a little bit better because they work against Ergon as well as they do aggressive decks, where Hellish Guardhound only really works against the aggressive decks. But Hellish Guardhound is a guaranteed body, whereas in the mirror, Brainwipe Beam sometimes doesn't work because they're able to sack their golems to their hidden laboratories. So that's something to keep in mind. If you don't have Yukis, kind of the same thing. You cut the Yukis, you put in the Quorums, you put in 2 Quorum Squires, and then for your 3rd light card, you can just put in a 3rd Hikari. If you don't have, now if you want to play this and you don't have both Yukis and the Shard Beast, so you do the same thing, you cut the Yukis. Instead of cutting the Shard Sword though, you'll cut the Yukis for 2 Quorum Squires, you'll play a 3rd Hikari, and then for the Shard Beasts, you'll still end up playing the 3-drop of your choice. Overall, I still think this deck is really good right now. I wouldn't recommend playing it without Yuki. I really do think you need Yuki to be able to keep up with other people who have Yuki. Ideally, I would like Yuki not to be legal just because of how much it costs right now and how hard it is to obtain and how meta impacting the card is. But overall, I think it's fine. I just wouldn't play the deck without Yuki. I think it is a solid deck, though, without the Shard Beast. You don't need the Shard Beast. for this deck to be playable right now. You just need a minimum of 6 1-drops. This one has 7 because I like a few more, and I like to kind of be able to play as many guys as possible. So it might go, like I said, there might be a third Hikari in the main, it might be in the side. I haven't decided yet. Finally, the flex spots, if you were to talk about flex spots, are the 2 Dust Strikes. If you wanted some other white card, like if you wanted to put 2 more Quorum Squires, like if you did want to go to 9 1-drops, you can cut the standard Shard Sword for 2 Quorum Squires. I would say everything else is pretty set in stone. You can't really, there's not too much flexibility outside of the mentioned cards. Maybe Philosopher's Stone is a cut. I really like Philosopher's Stone. It's not over the top broken, but it's just really good. Maybe you can even cut down on the Golem of Jealousy. I don't really want to because I think this card is really solid, especially versus Urgon, and even to some extent the Mirror. But that is a potential flex spot. I like it at 3 though. I would say Dust Strike is probably the biggest flex spot, and the cards I would look at considering are Brainwhite Beam or maybe Hellish Guardhound. More than likely Brainwhite Beam because you want spells. Alright guys, that's it for my video tonight. I thought this was as in-depth as I could get. If there's anything I didn't cover, I may have said something earlier that I was going to get into and forgot to, please post in the comments section so I can let you know what's going on. I will post updates as we get closer in our Facebook group and in our Discord as well. If you're not a part of those groups, it's only $5 to join. I will probably post in the comments section too of this video my updates closer to Indianapolis. I might not give you like a day-to-day or a week-to-week update like I would if you're in the Facebook or Discord group, but I will certainly try to get around to posting my final list before the Indianapolis Championship. Thanks again for watching, guys. Make sure to check out all our other content, our free articles, and make sure to subscribe. Thanks again, guys.